Hello everyone. Today I will be teaching you about Docker. Most of you probably use XAMPP or WAMP or MAMP for your local web development environment. And some of you who are maybe hacking or interested in hacking might be using a virtual machine for development. There's like Kali Linux and Ubuntu, which you can also install an environment on that makes you able to develop inside of it. But today I will be teaching you about Docker, which is kind of like a virtual machine, but way smaller. It is way more preferred for most development environments. There's a lot more problems you have with virtual machines compared to Docker environments. And if you compare it to XAMPP, there's even more possibilities with Docker. There's way more possibilities with Docker that you cannot have with XAMPP, WAMP, or MAMP. So it's definitely worthwhile to look at this tutorial. Maybe try it yourself after you've seen the tutorial. I definitely recommend trying it yourself. But this tutorial is mostly going to show you what you can do with Docker. And it's pretty much going to show you that the possibilities are almost infinite. So yeah, let me just get started by saying that I'll show you the prerequisites first, the things you're going to need beforehand, because there is tools that you're going to need like Docker itself, which I'm gonna talk a bit about. After that, I will be pretty much running you through how to do stuff with Docker, how to set up things with Docker. And at the end, we will have a result which will be able to run WordPress locally. But that pretty much also means that it's able to run pretty much anything, everything PHP related at least. Things like Node, they're a different beast entirely. But if you have developed with Node, you'll know that you don't really want to put your Node files or anything similar in a XAMPP environment anyway. You'll just have them separated because they don't work the same way that XAMPP does. But that'll come later. I don't think I will be talking about Node in this class, but that'll depend entirely on how long it'll take. I think the minimum is 30 minutes, but I'll probably be making it longer for what I have tested so far. But yeah, let's get started with the tools you're going to need. First of all, I am doing this on Windows, which is I normally do not develop on Windows because I think Windows is not really the best OS for developing. It has a lot of issues with developing, and tools like XAMPP and everything are kind of halfway solutions to problems Windows has. So yeah, if you're developing right now, I recommend looking into Linux. I've been working on Linux for almost 2 years now, and I can reliably say that it's definitely the best way to go. There is barely any. The biggest problem you have with Linux is the support for like graphics and everything like that. There's some driver issues here and there. But things like Ubuntu have support for pretty much anything. And if you don't like Ubuntu, then there's the OS, the distro that I'm using is Manjaro, which I definitely recommend as well. It's probably a little bit more complicated than Ubuntu because there's a lot of setup you need to do beforehand. But once you get it up and running, it's definitely the best way to go for development, at least. For gaming, not so much. If you game, keep Windows. That's pretty much the most important part of the OS. But the things you're going to need, first of all, an editor. I think everyone already has an editor. If you don't have an editor and you're developing, then I'm wondering how you're developing at all. As long as you're not using Notepad, normally it's fine. You can use Notepad++, which is probably the most basic of editors there is at the moment. It barely gives you anything, but it works. It does the job. But I am using VS Code simply because I think it is probably one of the best editors out there right now. There's also PhpStorm and Atom. I have used and am using I'm still using PhpStorm for my development at my job. And things like Laravel applications also use PhpStorm quite a lot. PhpStorm is pretty great for Laravel applications, or Magento development in my case. But other than that, VS Code is probably the way to go. Atom is also very recommended, but it has a bit more performance issues. And for someone who works on a Linux machine with, well, not that much resources, like VS Code is definitely the way to go. It's also pretty clean, in my opinion, at least. So that's a pre. But the things you're going to need, the IDE, in this case VS Code, you're going to need Docker, of course, which is not as easy to install as I thought on Windows. I see that Docker is now available on M1 Macs, which is great news. But if you need to install it on Windows, I would recommend probably looking up a tutorial for it, because there are some things that you need to change. There is 2 ways of installing it. This is the checkbox for deciding which way you want to run it or install it. Normally, Docker kind of uses their own virtualization system, like a virtual machine. Virtual machines in Windows, you can do that through like programs. I don't remember. I think like VirtualBox is one of the programs. But you also need to do some stuff in your Windows machine if you want to use that. And the same kind of goes for Docker in this case. But it is not a virtual machine. It's a difficult thing to explain. I might go into more detail in another video in the future, or I don't know. I probably won't for a while. It's not really the most important part of the tutorial. But if you get Docker up and running, if this thing turns green, you've pretty much done it right. But you're going to need either WSL2 or you're going to need Hyper-V. So to install it, I would recommend, if you're on Windows, I would recommend to just follow a tutorial. If you're on Mac, it's way easier. If you're on Linux, it literally goes with one command. But somehow with Windows, it's like one of the most annoying things to install. It just doesn't really install cleanly. But I do still recommend it for Windows. Now, there's a few things you got to know about having Docker installed. There is, because it's kind of you can just see it as a virtual machine, a way of starting virtual machines. You need to decide how many resources you're going to give your development environment. With XAMPP, I think it is just automatically managed, meaning it probably uses all of what you have on your PC, all your RAM, all your CPUs, pretty much all your disk image and everything like that. It's just, that's pretty easy. It's the easiest thing to set up. With Docker, you can completely decide for yourself how much you want your development environment to use. This might sound like a step backwards from XAMPP, but the good thing about this is that you can actually check how your applications perform with less memory or less bandwidth, anything like that. You can decide pretty much anything. I'm not sure if bandwidth is a thing in this settings menu, but there is definitely ways to do that as well. But you can decide, like, you can even say that it's allowed to use 12 CPUs. CPUs are pretty much the cores in your machine. I will not go into that more here, but you can choose how much you want Docker to use for your development environment. Yeah, anything other than that is not really that important right now. But yeah, you can decide how much you want your development environment to use, and you can see how it performs. Installing it is a bother. I will not be doing that now. Another tool you can use is Git Bash. I'm not sure. I think most of us have already seen this before. It's pretty much just like the terminal you already have, like this in Windows. This is also for Windows. It's meant for Windows, at least. It pretty much makes things look more like Linux, in my opinion. There's various features in there, like a GUI and everything, but that's not that important. The most important part is just it looks and feels way more like Linux, and it gives you options that are easier. Well, they're pretty much similar to Linux. Like I said, I recommend Linux. But it's pretty much the same way you normally use your terminal. There's only the difference of it looking like Linux and it working like Linux. You don't specifically need it for the tutorial, but I recommend it anyway because it's a better terminal compared to the normal Windows terminal. Yeah. Okay. Now let's get back to VS Code. I have set up a folder Docker tutorial with a WordPress zip in it. That is not needed for this tutorial. Like I said, you can look through this tutorial, you can listen to the tutorial. Right now, I probably do not recommend following along immediately because you're probably going to lose most of the information I will be telling. It's definitely a listen along tutorial, and once you've listened to it completely, you will hopefully get most of the things that a Docker environment brings. And when that's done, when the video is done, you can probably look it back from the start and try to actually follow along. Or if you're very ambitious, you can try without actually following along. You can just make a development environment immediately. But that completely depends on how much you get of what I'm actually doing. So if you have Docker installed, this is a terminal. This is the Bash terminal. You can enable this in Windows VS Code. I'm not going to go into it now, but I definitely recommend it. There's a lot of tutorials on it out there, but I don't have that much time. So if you have Docker installed, you can literally just run Docker in your terminal, and it'll show every command it has, which is quite a lot. There's quite a lot of services and things you can do with it. But we're only going to go into like a couple of things. So let's start out first with the normal Docker run. Docker is pretty much a management program. It's the same way XAMPP manages things. XAMPP is a control panel for Apache, MySQL, and within Apache there's also PHP. And once you click Start, you start PHP and Apache. And if you press Start on MySQL, you start MySQL. Docker is kind of the same. It starts services. You can start and stop services with it, and environments, small environments, which I'm going to go into later. So just for a test, if you want to run one of the services, I could do this, and it would run a MySQL. It would simply run MySQL. It could be really easy. It could be that easy. But I'm going to show you more because there's more to it than just that. So now I'm just going to show you Hello World, which is something that Docker made themselves. And it pretty much shows you what it kind of does. It shows you what happens if you run it. So first, it looks for an image. And if you've worked with Linux before, you'll know that images are like, let's just look at it from Windows. It's almost like it's a zip of a system or a zip of an environment. And in this case, the environment is Hello World and the latest version of it. And the image, it's the name of the image, pretty much. It's the name of the environment you want to use. And it says, I cannot find it locally because we have not installed that system or anything yet. We don't have it. But there's an online library. I think I can quickly get that up. Docker Hub. which is this. And this has a lot of images. Like if I type in MySQL here, you can see that there's a MySQL image or a MariaDB image, persona image for the people, Phpmyadmin image. There's things that you can add to your Docker environment. If you want to run it, or if you want to pull it locally, if you want to put it on your local machine, if you want this message to go away, pretty much, you use this command and you install it on your PC. The image, that is. But it's a bit complicated to go into what that really means yet, but I'll go into that later. Also, another advantage of this is that you can select different MySQL versions. So these are some of the ones they support. If you give the latest tag after it, it uses the latest one. But in case of PHP, this is way more important because PHP has way more versions. If you want to use the newest version on PHP, that's definitely possible in Docker. If you want to use that with your development environment. If you want to use a really old one, there is support for older ones. I just don't really know where that is right now. But I do know that there's still Docker images for it. But they've simply removed it from here because either they're deprecated, meaning you're not really recommended to use them, or they don't really, they pretty much don't really want you to use them anymore. But this is the place where you find things. You can even find Ubuntu, and yes, you can actually simply start a Ubuntu machine on your Windows by just running docker run Ubuntu, and it starts a Ubuntu machine. And again, it is not the same as a virtual machine because this, I can do it now. It's probably still going to take a while, but this goes way quicker than actually doing it. It's actually already done. Docker PS. This is not really a handy example. Okay, let me just fix this quickly. There's a small issue of already having done this tutorial for myself. Just forget this command right now. I just stopped some of the Docker things. Like you can stop Ubuntu as well, but docker run Ubuntu. Now, technically seen, it should just run the Ubuntu container, but because there are some things you need to do for it to actually run, Docker PS gives you a list of running containers. And as you can see, there is no Ubuntu in it. That's simply because you need something more than just Docker run Ubuntu. They explain that on this page as well, but right now I'm not really going to go into that. But yeah, if you want to run Ubuntu, you can actually do it really quickly with just this. But we're not really interested in running Ubuntu right now. I can just go here because this is the place where I have set up the files I will be needing right now. Because when you want to run Nginx, say you want to run Nginx, we're going to be using Nginx anyway because I like Nginx more. You type in docker run Nginx, it pretty much loads it online, it pulls it to your PC, and it immediately starts it. There's some logs that it shows. Right now this is not important, but you can remove those later on. But this is just a test case. Technically seen, if I now go to localhost, oh wait, no, never mind. No, that's not working. It is running. It is difficult to show you now because it's not really on your PC. If I run Nginx in here now, Nginx, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't load anything because it's not installed on your PC. It is a container with Nginx on it. So it has its own little environment. Like I said, it sounds a lot like a virtual machine, but it's way quicker and easier to set up. So this just has the latest Nginx running right now. You can see that it's running because I cannot type anymore. I'm trying to type now. I cannot type anymore. It's because I'm looking at the container pretty much while it's running. I can also stop it by running Ctrl-C, which is probably a key combination that you have used before. But right now, Nginx is running. But the problem is, if you want to go to localhost, you need ports to be opened. This thing already has that problem fixed. Normally seen to go to a website, you use ports 80, pretty much. You use ports 80 for HTTP, and you use ports 443 for HTTPS. In this case, we've just started Nginx, but there's no configuration in it, and there's no ports that are opened. So there's no way to access it from our home machine. If we go to localhost, there's nothing there. It doesn't load. It doesn't reach anything. And that is, it's the same problem you have with a virtual machine. You cannot enter an Nginx from outside the virtual machine without doing a lot of crazy stuff with the virtual machine itself. In this case, though, we can easily fix that by doing, I don't know the flags, but it's pretty much like this, which is for the port, and then doing 8080. I don't think, I'm not sure if it's this. No, it's not this exactly, but that's pretty much the way you do it. Well, anyhow, that's not really, we're not going to run it like this, because if you want to run Nginx or Apache, and you want to run MySQL in the same way, and you want to run PHP in the same way, then it's a mess. It's a mess to start and stop all of that. So there's a solution for that, which is Docker Compose. It automatically comes with Docker. And it pretty much, like this says, it defines and runs multi-container applications. And because in a normal virtual machine, if you want to run an application, you're going to need to have Nginx, PHP, and whatever you need those all in one virtual machine. And the problem with that is that if PHP crashes, pretty much all of it crashes. The whole PC, if one part breaks, everything breaks. And that's because it's all on one big container, which is probably then Ubuntu. All of your services, PHP, Nginx, and MySQL, are all in one environment. And with Docker, you put your service into a separate environment. So say I want to run Nginx like I just did, it actually puts it into its own little environment, and it has no access to my files at all. It has no access. And if I run PHP as well now, after running this, that PHP also has no access to the Nginx, and the other way around. There is no connection between them. So we're going to have to fix that. That's why Docker Compose is made, because this makes you able to define and run multi-container applications. So you can easily run both PHP and MySQL and Nginx together, and connect them as well. And for that, if we want to start, which I'll be doing now, you need a Docker Compose config file. This is a configuration file. This is how you name it. This is the preferred way to name it. And this completely goes automatic. If I run Docker Compose upd, Docker Compose up pretty much means that it's going to look at this file, and it's going to read everything that's in it, and then it's going to start everything that this defines. So if we run it now, it says it needs to be an object. It's a weird way to say there's nothing in it. This thing doesn't contain anything. This thing doesn't do anything. So we're going to have to set up like a blueprint for our application. And if you do this once, you can replicate it for any of your applications. So say we want to, the first thing we're going to have to fill in is the version of Docker that you want to use. In our case, it's 3.9. I don't specifically know why we're using 3.9. I think it's either the latest version or one of the latest versions, but it pretty much helps with the whole tutorial. There's different versions for it, and some of the things will change in the Docker Compose files, but you can configure all of the Docker Compose config information composer file. See, there's a lot of different versions. The 3.9 isn't even in here, but there is one. So yeah, it doesn't really matter. I think you can run pretty much anything in anything. It says that there are versions, but you can, if you type in 3, just 3 like this, it works. So I'm just going to put in 3 now. It pretty much picks the best out of all of them that is needed for your Docker. But the version doesn't really matter that much. Just put 3 in there for now, and if it ever gives an error, you can look it up, and it probably says here that there's either a new version or things have changed. There's also, like, this shows you everything that needs to be in it. This is the whole documentation of everything, but we're not going to go through all of that. The first thing that you're going to need is services, because you need services. You want to use Nginx, which is a service, or PHP, which is also a service. So say I want to use Nginx. I am actually going to get another file here because it makes it way easier to explain while actually doing it. If you want to run a service, this is just the name. For now, I'm going to name it Nginx, but say you want to use web or app, that's also fine. The name doesn't really matter that much. The name is just used so that you can know what it really does and what it is used for. And it uses an image. We have just learned that an image is pretty much kind of a template of an environment. And in this case, we want Nginx. Now I have put stable Alpine in here. Stable is just the most stable version of Nginx right now. Nginx defines that themselves. And Alpine is like the most basic version of Linux. So this pretty much means it's a stable image, but it's really small. It's one of the most small images out there right now, the stable Alpine image. You don't need this. You can remove this and it'll still work. It's just going to set up a little bit more extra things into it. There's more versions. I have shown you that a while ago. But right now we're just going to use the stable Alpine because we don't need a lot. We don't really need to have a lot of extra stuff with Nginx. I mean, we're using this, and I don't think any of us has ever changed the Apache config that much. And if this were Nginx, then you know the Nginx configuration is a different thing because you need to set up quite a bit in it, but but you can't really use Nginx. It's not possible to use Nginx easily with XAMPP, so another reason to use Docker. But we're using the Nginx stable Alpine image, which is going to use ports. Ports. And this is where 8080 happens. This is what I said in the terminal before. This opens these ports, 80 on the container to 80 on my machine. So this makes sure that that the ports are opened from the container to my machine, which means that if I go to localhost, if I run this and go to localhost, which I can actually do, yes, I think, Docker Compose up. Docker Compose up, like I said, it runs it. The D flag, which it's called the D flag, it means that that you're not inside the container. Just a second ago, when I ran something here, you were noticing that I got stuck inside of it. I was not able to type anything anymore. The D flag pretty much makes sure that that you're not inside of the container in the terminal, so you can still type anything pretty much. You can still go on, but as you can see, it has created the Docker tutorial Nginx 1 container. So if I look into Docker PS, it both shows the old Nginx container I have started and the new one. And another positive about this is that you can run multiple Nginx containers at a time. You can run multiple PHPs at a time, which has some good things about it, but I'm not really going to go into that right now. It gets its own container ID. That's what you normally call it by. And this pretty much says what it's doing when it starts the container up. That's not important that much. It shows when it's created. It shows whether it's up or down. So when it's started, it's up. When it's when it crashed, it's down, or when it stops in general. And this is about the ports, what I talked about. This thing, it says it uses 80. But here you see that it has some extra stuff. And this pretty much means that the host 80 is port forwarded to the container and the other way around. So they are connected. You can use, if you start another Nginx container with the same thing, then it's not possible because you have two applications running the same port. And Docker doesn't like that, because you should not need to have two applications using the same port. This is the name of the Docker container. This is also what you can call it by. This is just a random name generated, but if I do docker stop, let's check if this works. Yes. So now it stopped the useless Nginx container, which we started before, because we don't need it anymore. And that also means that you've stopped Nginx just on your PC if there's only one container active. But moving on. Right now, if I go into here and I go into localhost, welcome to Nginx. And now you have Nginx set up. Technically seen, you could use this as, well, whatever you use Nginx for. There's things like proxies and everything, but you can already use this right now. But we're not really going to now, because there is way more that you need to do for it to, be actually helpful. So we're going to run docker compose down, and that just stops it. It stops it and it removes it, which means that there is no Nginx even on your PC anymore. Nginx doesn't even exist on your PC. There's no files left of your Nginx, which keeps your PC clean and makes sure there's no remnants of any old versions of it. Same goes for PHP. If you install PHP like 7.4 on your PC and then switch to 7.3, if you don't uninstall PHP 7.4 quickly, or if you don't uninstall it in the right way, or if you just uninstall it normally, but there's still files left over, there's a pretty big chance of you running into errors, or PHP giving notifications that you should switch to 7.4 because there's some files that are wrong. And this makes sure that doesn't happen. There's nothing left behind. There is literally no remnants of anything we've created with this. The only thing that's left out of this is the blueprint, which keeps your machine clean, and it's a quick way to set up Nginx. I mean, this file pretty much takes care of your Nginx right now. And for now, we're going to start PHP as well. Now on the right, it shows you information, which right now is not that important because it gets kind of complicated. But right now, let's just set up PHP, which in this case, I think this just works. Let me just check that. And it doesn't need any ports. So we have it already down. Let's get it back up. Let's see if it actually gets PHP 7.4. It pulls it. Yeah, it says it already exists because I've already tried this before. And it's done. And I'm not sure if it actually stays on right now. No. That's because there is no real connection in between PHP and Nginx. If you run PHP like this, just this, like as a start, it pretty much starts your container thinking you're going to run a command, and when you don't run a command, then it's just going to stop it again. I think I think this fixes that. So let me check that out. So all you have to do if you change versions or anything, you have to just stop the containers and start the containers. That should be it. Doesn't even tell you that it's done anything, but let me check if it's on. And it's on. So the FPM, I haven't really looked into it, but I think it just means that it stays on. It doesn't really look for any commands. It just stays on as a kind of a server. Yeah. So this is just PHP and Nginx that are set up. And technically seen, if you were to go into one of these containers and make a PHP index file, index.php, it would run it in the local host. This would work already. But there are some slight issues which will have to be changed, because if we do that, if we go into the Docker container, I'm not going to go into how and what happens, but if we go into there and we create a project with index.php and we stop it like this, then we remove both PHP and Nginx, which also means we're removing the whole project. And we don't really want to remove the whole project. That's not exactly a good way to develop. So if we want to actually, we don't want to develop inside of the container at all, actually. We would much more prefer it to be in here. So say I create a WordPress folder, and I'm just going to put an index.php file in it. And PHP, whoops, and then an echo test, like this. This is a PHP file, this works. But the problem is that this file, this whole folder, does not get taken into the Docker container. This thing doesn't do anything. The only thing that gets taken into the container is the image. The image is all that's in there now. So if you want to actually take something from your host into the container, you're going to have to add, volumes. And volumes are pretty much just connections between your PC and the container. So in this case, we want to use WordPress from our machine, and we want to put that into the typical, yeah, this is not really handy. Not sure. Yeah, okay. We want to put everything we want to synchronize this folder with the HTML folder, meaning that everything that's in here will be put into this HTML folder. And that's what you want, because this is going to be where your application inside of Nginx is going to be shown. But you also need to do that for PHP, because if you want to run stuff with PHP, it needs access to those files. And like I said, there is no connection between PHP and Nginx. So PHP also needs to know where the files are and what files there are. And now this just gets synchronized across both, because this is it just changes depending on what uses it and everything. So if you use PHP to change a file, it'll first go to your machine, and then it'll go to the Nginx machine through synchronization. But right now, yeah, I cannot really show that it works, simply because the default Nginx folder for actually showing you this is actually not this folder. Normally seen, that's a different folder, which kind of makes things a bit more difficult. But I'll go into that later. I guess I could do that now, really. So, all right. So we're going to have to change the default Nginx folder, because right now, if we refresh, first of all, it doesn't do anything because we stopped it. But if we start it, yeah, this is something annoying with Windows. It asks you if you want to share the folders with the containers. This is not a thing in Linux. Just forget about it. Just click share and be done with it. Now I can show you, because the containers are running, and if I go Docker, what was it again? Exec? I think it's exec. So this pretty much means I'm going to execute a command inside one of the Docker containers. Now the flags, you should just forget for now, because you're probably not going to use them anytime soon. But, and then bash. So I am executing inside of this container, which is just the three starting things of the container ID. I think you can also do the name, but I prefer this. It's easier. And I want to run bash in that. And this pretty much means that it's interactive, so it keeps it open. So instead of just running bash and not doing anything, now it should get me in there. And now I'm inside of my container. This shows the machine. And if we look, it is the same. It's just the machine name. And we're also already in this var www.html folder. And if we look, there is an index.php file. And if we use the cat command to check what's in the index.php file, it's in there. The information we have is in there. And if we change it and look again, it changes in the container as well. And this is where the beauty of Docker comes in. You can do anything in here, by the way. This thing, if you look at the main folder, the head folder, it's still like almost a full environment. Yet it's not a virtual machine. So it only installs what it needs to run Nginx. And if you look at the start and stop time of starting and stopping a container, it's barely anything. Nginx barely needs anything. It only installs the things it needs again. So that makes it really quick and really tiny as well. But this means that both of these are working. Both PHP and Nginx have access to the WordPress folder. But like I said, if we go here, it doesn't show anything new. And that's because Nginx normally uses a different folder. Normally seen, it doesn't use this. Like if we were to put the WordPress folder somewhere else, which is the default Nginx position, that would work as well. But this is normally preferred. So what we have to do is we're going to have to add another volume, which is the Nginx configuration we're going to add. This is the default Nginx configuration location. And we're simply going to synchronize that with the one we have on our own machine. And right now we don't have any, but I'm just going to copy and paste. Copy folder. All right. Forget the PHP now. So the Nginx, we now have the config folder, the Nginx folder, and the default.config. And this thing, most of this is default. It's pretty much just a default thing. I don't think I've changed anything in here. If you don't know much about Nginx, don't really look at this. It's not important. The only thing that's important is that it listens to port 80, which we've opened, and it uses the server name localhost. If you change this to like test.test, you're going to have to add this inside your host file. I think most of you know what the host file is, but the host file decides, if you type in here now test.test, it goes through the host file and it looks if it needs to be sent through something different. So if I type in test.test right now, it's going to throw me to something which doesn't exist apparently. But if you put this domain test.test inside of your host file, then it'll check if your host file is pretty much like, I think this, and then test.test. And the host file pretty much means that this thing on your PC is the same as this. That's what the host file says. So if you go to test.test then inside of your browser, it checks it in your host file and it says, oh, that's the same as this. And this is the same as localhost. This is what localhost is. I think it's the 2. I'm not sure if it's the 2, but it's what the localhost is. So test.test becomes the same as just putting localhost in there. And if you put test.test in here, then it recognizes the test.test as well. But that's a little bit more complicated to explain why that's useful. But for the people who are interested in Nginx configuration, there's a lot of good stuff you can do in here. But the only thing we're interested in right now is the root, which tells Nginx to look in here and to specifically look for the index or index.php file. And actually, we should add the index.html file because it should also look for that. If you put help.php here now, that simply means that if you have a help.php file in here, but not an index.php file, it'll actually immediately show you the help.php file. So for the people wondering why it's index.php or index.html which gets loaded, this is the reason. The default configuration for Nginx tells Nginx that it should look for the index files. But you can decide on your own whether that's what you want or whether that's not what you want. But yeah, so we've added the Nginx configuration, which tells it the root, which should be the same as what we've entered here. This is not really what we've entered here. Okay, let me just make this smaller because we really don't want to see this. Now, just hoping it works, because this is a live demo and I have no clue whether it actually works well enough. So let's check it out. It's going to start it up. Yes, we want to share the new configuration we've added. It asks that for any volume, by the way, which is really annoying, but it only does it once if you start the containers. Or if you start the containers, it's only going to ask the first time. But because I've added a new volume, it asked it again. And now we can check if they're on. They're on. Yep, most definitely. Now we can refresh, and it shows test 2. So if we edit this and, I don't know, do test 3 or whatever, test 3. And now technically seen you already have your PHP and Nginx ready. This simply works. If you would put, I'm just going to do it. Why not? So if we would open this and open WordPress, because we've named it WordPress, so, going to have to check it out. Now WordPress is inside of the WordPress folder. It synchronizes it, meaning that if we refresh now, it'll load for a second because it's WordPress. And it needs to set up some beginner stuff. And there we go. We can already start. But the problem is we don't have a... Okay, great. We don't have a database. We don't really need a database. I mean, with WordPress, we need a database, but with normal PHP files, you might not need a database. So to start up the database, this is the reason why XAMPP also has it separate from Apache. Sometimes you don't even need a database, so there's no reason to start it up. And Docker works the same. If you don't need one, why would you add one? So this blueprint decides if your application needs one or not. But the thing is, for MySQL, we're going to need it. So I'm just going to stop it and then going to add MySQL and an image, which is going to be MySQL latest, because we always want the latest MySQL version. We want environment. And this is something which is MySQL Docker specific, because you can, this doesn't really mean a whole lot here. There is environment variables that you can set when you start up MySQL. Because it constantly removes MySQL again, if you set any of the root usernames or root passwords or user passwords, it'll not actually keep those. It'll not keep that because it destroys everything. There is no MySQL left at the end of the day. So to fix having to, do all of that again every time, we can just add environment variables, which we're just gonna test DB, just to make it a bit more easier than the write. The user is going to be test user, and the password test secret, sure. MySQL root password, root secret. My God. Okay. Root secret, yes. Another thing we could do, I have done this on the right. There is a reason for it. But you don't really need to open the port right now. Yeah, if you want to connect it with PHP, you do. But so we're going to do it now because we need to connect it with PHP. I'm not really going to go into why you could prefer not to use it. So I'm not going to add the volume net because that comes later. But right now we have a MySQL service set up, one of the MySQL services. And this means that if I stop and start it, like I've done before, so we down it first, we have broken something, which is ports, right? Well, pretty good to know. Oh, we already stopped it. Okay, whoops. And we start it, and it should load it all up. Yep, MySQL. Let's see if it actually works. It does. Is it still on? It is, meaning that it just works. It also shows you that you have done the port thing I was talking about. Yeah, there's an extra port in here. I'm not sure what it's used for, but we have not forwarded that. So it's there. It's on the machine. The firewall on that container has opened it, but we don't need it. So now this also means that if you have Navicat or I think it's called MySQL Workbench, that you can access this because you've opened the ports. So if you ever wanted to use a program to access your MySQL database, then you can do that now because it is open to your host as well as the other containers. There's a small problem at the end, but I will be talking about that later. Okay, Docker Compose. No, I don't have to down. Okay, so if I go into here now, and I just quickly go back to localhost, and it's like, yes. So now we can test DB. The username will be test user. Password will be test secret. But the host name, now this is an interesting one. Because we're running Docker, it is not actually on the local host. It's in a container. So the access to this also goes for your Navicat and MySQL Workbench. If you put in localhost as the host, then it'll not work because it's a container. And we named the container MySQL. And the names of these containers are also the hosts. So if we put in localhost, it'll not work. But if we put in MySQL, Or if we change this to the database, you could put database in here, and that'll work as well. But right now we're going to keep it MySQL to keep it simple. This will work. Now if I click send, it won't work because there is a critical error. It's great, by the way, that I use the Dutch WordPress for a English tutorial, but that's fine. It gives a critical error. That's what this says for the people who don't speak Dutch. Which is because we have PHP, but normally in a in this thing, in XAMPP, if you look at the configuration of PHP, there is all these extensions, which okay, well, not going to find it apparently. There is all these. My God, this file is way too big. I'm going to have to look through all of this. Here. Extensions that are turned on by default. Some of these extensions are, most of these extensions you probably don't even know. But you can turn on more by removing that thing, and it'll turn it on the next time you start it up. But a lot of them are already on without you knowing it, and they kind of bloat your PHP. But you need some, like MySQLi, which we all use to use MySQL pretty much, or PDO MySQL for the people who are have advanced a bit more into the MySQL, because this is probably the preferred way to access MySQL from PHP. But they've already enabled both of these as a standard. They have no OpenSSL, so if you need an SSL connection, that's not possible through OpenSSL without enabling it. But there's a lot of extensions. You can also add extensions, but I won't go into that right now. But there's a lot of extensions which are enabled without you knowing it, and you don't really need them. Some are still enabled by default, even in Docker, because PHP needs them. But things like MySQLi, they're just disabled in Docker because it doesn't know that you need them. So we need to fix that. And that kind of gets difficult quite quickly. But I'm just going to go into it quickly. Because to fix that, we're going to have to run some commands when it starts up PHP. We're going to have to tell it to actually use those, to both install and use those extensions. But to run some commands at the beginning of the container, or to change the container that it uses, we're going to have to kind of create our own. So we're going to have, instead of image, we're going to build our own image. And the context doesn't really matter. It's just a dot to tell it that it's somewhere in this normal file, like in this folder. If I type in dot here, it pretty much means the current folder you're in. But the Docker file, which is now in config php Docker file, this is now the same thing as this. And if you, or what it was before, and if you look in here, this is still the same. It still takes the PHP image. So it's still going to take this same PHP image and run it. But it's going to run something once it starts up. And this is a command which is literally used for this specific problem, because it's going to docker php extension install MySQLi PDO and PDO MySQL. This pretty much installs and starts both of them, because they're not in your machine. This is pretty much the Alpine image I was talking about. If you put Alpine behind here to make it even smaller, that is possible, but I do not recommend that because you'll lose some other functionalities that you might need, and you might not know how to install those. But these are extras, and normally they come with this, with all XAMPP. But because we're using Docker, and Docker doesn't really know what you need in your PHP environment, you're going to have to turn those on yourself. This sounds really complicated, and this looks quite complicated already as a project, but if you set this up once, it's only a matter of, if you want to use 7.3, you put 7.3. And you can copy paste this everywhere. The only thing that'll change is what's in the WordPress folder. So you should probably name this something else. I think the most default thing people use is source, because you can use that for every project. I just named it WordPress to make it easier right now. But yeah, this works for every single project. You do have to copy paste it though. If you want it to be the exact same as XAMPP, you could just put a subfolder in here, which is like, I don't know, period 4. And you could put your projects in here. And it means you can do this and then period 4. And, you know, that's the default functionality. But normally seen, that's not really how you want to do your projects. You don't want them all in one environment. That's a very ugly way of working. Because you might need different PHP versions for different projects. You know, if you use WordPress, if you use an older version of WordPress, there's a big chance that you need another version of PHP. And if you work with XAMPP, then that means you cannot put it in the same folder because you need a different version of PHP. So it's preferred to change your PHP version depending on the project you're running. And again, this sounds very complicated, but if you use it a bit, then you'll notice that this is actually a simple copy-paste problem, and that's about it. So now we have told the blueprint. The blueprint tells Docker to build this Docker file, this image. And it's pretty much the same as the image we had before, except that it runs an extra command. You could do this in another way, but this is the most preferred way. Docker compose down. It deletes everything, except, of course, the WordPress folder, because that's on our machine. And Docker compose upd. Now, it even shows you that it is building it. It shows you what it's doing, which is quite complicated for the most part. But here it says one of the two things it's doing is from Docker.io. This is just extra. It gets the image, the default image we had, and then it caches the thing before as well, and it runs this. That's pretty much it. And it's exporting it to an image, and then we can run it. So this is now our own Docker image. And you can run that everywhere on your machine. So if you want to run the same image, the next time it'll start way quicker. If I down it now, and then put it back up, it loads way quicker than the first time, because it has already built the image. It has already done it. So it doesn't need to rebuild it. It caches everything. Okay, so let's check if everything is still running. Seems like there's no errors. Everything is up. So now we can go back here. We can go to localhost. We can start. I should have really used different passwords and things. testdb, test user, test secret, MySQL. And now it works. Now you have a MySQL connection. We can install. We can call it test. I don't know. My name is, no, let's just do Nick. And my password is secret. And yes, it's weak, I know. Well, you just do test.test.com. And we don't want search machines to find this. Not that that works anyway, but you know. And now, technically seen. Oh God, what did I use this password? This? Yep. We're here. And this is your WordPress environment. And you can do anything with this. Apparently, I'm on an old version. No? No, never mind. Okay. Interesting. But yeah, now this works. Now, if you want something else than WordPress, you could definitely throw it in and it would work. I'm not sure about Laravel, but technically seen, it should. There might be some complications with extra things you need. Like in here, we need these extra, and there's a possibility that Laravel needs more as well. But there's tutorials out there for pretty much any different framework or thing you need. But like I said, this is only for the most basic of things. You could literally go here. Oh, here we go again. Am I doing something wrong? Was it not extensions? Here we go again. If you wanted the extensions that are in here, you could literally... Oh my god. You could literally just copy this name and add it here and it would work. So if you would want the exact same as here because you think you might be missing something or are missing something because there's some things which are needed, you could add all of these. But Docker is all about making it as minimalistic as possible, using the most light version of an environment as possible, or making it the exact same as your staging or live environment. So we all have this this thing, you know, this environment, and it might have different PHP versions, or it might have different Nginx version. Like things could be different, and there's a big chance that if it uses, I don't know, a really old PHP version, and you want to use 8.0, that it doesn't work, that your application works locally, but it doesn't work when you put it on here. So what you can do is look which PHP version this has running and simply use that in your local PC. And that makes it, that means that you will have no errors that will come from PHP. Except, of course, these extras, which you're going to have to figure out as well on the machine. But that means that you'll have the same environment. You'll have the same, literally the same environment, meaning less environment errors and more application errors. You can look more at the application errors, and you don't need to look as much into like which PHP version actually broke something and why something is not compatible with something. And if you want to do an update, like if you have an old application with PHP 5, for instance, and you want to update it to 7, you can now update that locally and push it to a server later on. You can update it locally, change it whatever you like, and after that you can use that on the server, which is pretty neat. But there is a problem with what we have created now, because we do have a beautiful WordPress server now with one of the best sites there is. In Dutch, of course, because this is not a Dutch tutorial. But if we Docker compose it down, which we're going to do now, and you look at what happened, you'll notice it has just removed MySQL. There's nothing being saved. So if we Docker compose it up again, you'll realize that all of the hard work you have done, all of the things you have created, are now gone. They're gone. Nothing's left. And it says an error with the database connection. I think because it's WordPress, that's because of, the config having the database information in it and it not really seeing the database, or like no info about it at least. But I think if you refresh a couple of times, yeah, okay. So the database connection is still correct, but it never saved anything in the database. And that's a problem. You don't want that. But there's a simple fix, which is just to add a volume which points to your, well, it's just going to make a new folder, which is MySQL. And that's literally going to be your database. It's going to be all of your MySQL, actually. It's not just your database. It's going to be pretty much everything. So if we docker compose down, and it's just going to remove stuff, docker compose up D. Notice we don't have any folders right now because there's nothing you can start with. So there is no folder which is called MySQL. But if we start it, it's still, yes, I want to share it. It's still going to create a folder called MySQL, and it's going to sync everything from this folder into there. And as you can see, there is quite a lot of stuff in it. Now, I have no clue how the normal MySQL folder works and what's in it. But you might need the keys at some point. I have no clue what they all do. What I do know is that this is your database information. So if we go here now, we need to refresh again. Let's just do the exact same thing, really. Add install. Well, Nginx, secret, and done. All right. Now we docker compose down, just down. It's going to remove it, but we now have the database information. So if we, if we test out, it should not work now at all. It should just give an error because there's nothing localhost. Yes. Docker compose up D. And it loads it back up. It checks the MySQL information, might even edit some stuff because it started back up again. Oh, and it already loaded. Yeah, it already works. Nothing changed. Test is still there. We're still the user. And it's all the same. Nothing got removed. Yet it is clean. So anything outside of this, if there's a hacker, which is a really weird thing, but if you can test penetration or hacking with this, which is something I'll go in really, really tiny right now. You have a system. Now we have started. So if we do the run thing again, Docker exec it. Yeah, okay. I need something first for that. Docker ps to check the IDs. Docker exec interactive, and we look into the well, let's just say PHP. We look into the PHP. There's a whole system in here, and if there is hackers that are able to get into your WordPress folder, they are able to add anything to everywhere, pretty much. They're able to edit everything. Now, because this is your local environment, there's no hackers except yourself. But say you want to test out hacks, you can just try to hack into this right now, and you can try to add files outside of this WordPress folder. Because everything outside of this WordPress folder, and the MySQL folder, of course, will be deleted. So you can test anything you want with this system. You can test anything, because everything will get deleted anyway, except the WordPress folder. So if you change anything in here, if I say remove a file, I'm not going to do that right now. I mean, I can remove the README. It'll remove it. Yeah. So if you hack the WordPress itself, of course, then you'll still break the files of WordPress themselves, but you cannot break the system itself, because the system will be absolutely reloaded from scratch every time you start it up. So now everything is deleted again, except the WordPress folder. So now this is pretty much it. Yeah. We're 1 hour and 15 minutes in, pretty much, which is way too long compared to what I had in my head. But yeah. I mean, I can explain a small detail. If you're on, I'm not sure how it is with Windows, but I do know that if you are on Mac uses a different version of Docker entirely. Same goes for Windows, but I'm not sure if you need the same thing. And in Mac, there is this issue of having really low, like, your Docker can crash simply from using these things, because this works really slow in Mac. It barely works at all. I'm not going to go into why exactly, because it's really technical. It has a lot to do with the file system and security Apple has in place. But if you type delegated behind it, again, no clue what it means, but I do know that it works. If you type this behind everything, it pretty much means it's on Mac, it goes way quicker. I'm not sure why it's not default, but this makes your whole environment way quicker on Mac. I'm not sure how it is on Windows, and testing it out is not really going to work with a simple PHP, MySQL, and Nginx environment, but you get the point. And now, yeah, I think this is it. Now, because I kind of went over it quite quickly in the beginning of the lesson, but because Windows uses different virtualization things compared to Linux and Mac, you need to use either the Hyper-V backend, as they call it, or WSL2. I recommend WSL2, but it's quite a hassle to install. It is not easy to install. It was, but apparently they changed quite a lot of things. But I definitely recommend to use this, just to, I don't know, find some YouTube tutorial about how to enable this. As soon as you have enabled this, you can turn this on and it should work. But there are some things you're going to have to change. I also recommend to either put this on full or put this on somewhere like 70%, 80%, because Docker automatically has things in place to not make your PC crash if it uses everything. And your PHP and MySQL is not going to take everything either. So if you want a speedy environment for Laravel, that's quite nice. Then you should just probably use everything anyway. Same goes for the memory swap. Doesn't really matter. The disk image size is completely dependent on how many images or videos you want on your website. Other than that, it's not going to go above 64 gigs. But yeah, I think this is pretty much all of the tutorial. Now, there is this thing which I was actually going to talk about. There is this small problem because now you have the local host right here. And it's not going to work because I removed and stopped it. But there is this thing which is Phpmyadmin, and I think it is automatically added to your XAMPP environment. I have no clue if that is true. Yes, it is. Which, as you'll notice, is not actually installed into this. There is no Phpmyadmin. Now, I recommend not to use Phpmyadmin anyway, because I either use MySQL Workbench or Navigat or any program because it's already way better than Phpmyadmin, or you use MySQL itself if you're really into that. I don't have any MySQL programs. I use MySQL like this, but that's not really a recommended way anyway. But programs like MySQL Workbench or anything like that are a way better way of connecting to your database compared to Phpmyadmin. But say you want to add Phpmyadmin, you will simply have to, making a mess. Oh god. Phpmyadmin image Phpmyadmin. Now the thing is, I just have to look into Phpmyadmin Docker. And if you look at the Phpmyadmin Docker, which you need, First of all, you're going to need I'm just going to do latest to make it easy. Yeah, okay, so this connects using your MySQL server credentials. Okay, that's not really that important right now. User password are optional. Not important, not important. This tells you what the FPM pretty much does. If you already have a separate... Okay. Yeah, that's right now. Yeah, I think we need FPM actually. FP. So I need to check the tags. Okay, FPM. Because we already have a like it says here, it only starts a PHP FPM container, and you need to use this if you already have a separate web server, which we do. Let's check. So web server. We can also do FPM Alpine. I think that works as well. Okay. But we still need to add some ports, because if you look at the Phpmyadmin, this doesn't matter right now. But the ports, you need to have the ports. And it's a question of what ports does Phpmyadmin use. Right now, it does this, which I will not do. This is the preferred way on your local machine, because we already have something on the port 80, and we don't really want to have any problems with that. Now, I'm not sure what this does, but let's just add it because they're telling us to add it. If you want Phpmyadmin to work, I think after this, it should already work. It's just going to get it, which should not take that long. Then it's going to start everything up, which on Windows actually takes way longer than on Mac and on Linux. Now we go here. This should still work. Now I think it's like this. No. Oh, what was it again? This is the problem with like knowing what it is again. That's such a complicated thing. Yeah, I mean, I could go into this right now, but really. Login page. Okay, let's take this away. 8080. I don't know. I don't know why it doesn't really work. I can probably try the 80 in a second. Let's try the 80 in a second. Like this. Docker compose done and docker compose upd. This pretty much means I'm just running both commands after each other. So it's going to stop it, it's going to remove it, and now it's going to start it back up again. I have no clue, by the way. I have never tested with Phpmyadmin. No, I don't know. I do not know how to to do this exactly. I thought this was gonna work, but I don't know. It seems like there's some other stuff you need to do, but I'm not sure where and how that looks. So right now I'm just gonna leave this be. But there's tutorials on it, how to add Phpmyadmin. That's pretty easy to find. But like I said, I do not recommend to use Phpmyadmin anyway, because the programs help you with all these problems. And you can use the programs to connect the MySQL databases online as well, which PHP cannot do. So, but yeah, everything else still works. It should, at least. Yeah. And this is pretty much just your XAMPP environment. And now you might be thinking, well, that took about 1 hour, 1.5 hours compared to about a minute or 5 to install, to download, install, and get this working. And I would be saying, yes, it is most definitely more difficult to run this. And if you start thinking about you needing to do this for every single project, then yes, that is not exactly an optimal way to create your own dev environment. But the thing is, what you have right now in here is exactly the same as this. There is no FileZilla though, and there's no Apache. If you need Apache, that is almost as easy as this. It's literally a way of looking up Apache, which is this, by the way, for the people who didn't know. HTTPD is Apache. It's just a different name for it, but and this should already tell you how to run it normally. But from what it looks like, without a Docker file, yeah, okay. What it looks like, it's pretty much almost the same as what we have, but it seems that the port is different for Apache. But that's a simple change. It's pretty much like this, but we're gonna have to do this, and that's the only change. And then you'll have to do this Apache, and the volumes will stay the same. And the configuration file, it seems like the configuration file has also changed because it's a different configuration file on a different location. But that's not. I don't even know if you need a configuration file because Apache works a bit different with the main folder. But other than that, it's not that difficult to replace stuff in your environment, and you cannot really replace stuff in this environment. But yeah. Other than that, if you want to add anything, you can add anything you want. If you want to add Node, or because you can run Node applications in this, because you don't need Nginx for that. You don't need PHP for Node. You might need MySQL for that. To run Node, you can literally just image Node, and that works. And then you have a Node environment. And if you want to run commands in that Node environment, like npm run build, yeah, you're going to have to do that a little different now, but that's you're going to have to do that with this command, like I said. But you could do the IT, and you could do the interactive part and just work inside your container. But again, that's going a lot more in depth, looking a lot more in depth into how to use Node containers. But like I said, this whole technology is relatively new, but it's definitely the new way of running local environments. At least it's going to be the new way. It's already the new way now among businesses with developing standards and everything. Most businesses right now still use just use whatever you want to use, but Docker is definitely the cleanest way to do anything. Because if you want to send this to a friend, if you want your friend to have the exact same project, you can now both send the project itself, the WordPress, but also the database. You don't need to make a database dump because this is your database. You can just copy paste everything in here. You don't even need this because, no installation needed anymore. You can just copy paste this and you have your whole WordPress environment set up. I could name this differently and then I could name this WordPress and then the version behind it, and then I'd have a WordPress environment set up. And yeah. So this is pretty complicated stuff for the people that normally only use this and barely have any knowledge of the whole config part of it, or things you can change and whatever. I don't even know what Mercury and Tomcat are, but you have access to those. But with Docker, you have way more options, pretty much. I'm a Linux user, so for me, this is going from Windows to Linux is a very difficult move, simply because it gets way more complicated. There's a lot more things you have to look into. There's errors you're going to have to fix yourself. So Docker for me was kind of already a given. It was already like I knew I was going to have to use Docker at some point, because while it's harder to get to know, it is way better in terms of making environments on your PC. You don't need anything locally. MySQL is not installed on my PC, Nginx is not installed on my PC. I mean, through this it is, but once I remove this, there's no need for it anymore. The only thing you need is Docker. If you guys install Docker and I send you this, you can literally just run it and you have a WordPress environment completely set up and ready to work, which is the advantage of the whole thing. Now, I have a GitHub. It is private right now. I'll make it public in a bit, which gives the more like extended version. Like I said, it has the delegated things in it. Yeah. Well, it's pretty much the same. I'm going to add a README, and then I'm going to upload the things I have. And I think that's the lesson. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope your brain is not completely broken yet, because there's probably another lesson you're going to have to follow sooner or later. But this is how you set up your own Docker WordPress environment or anything PHP related. This is pretty much how you set up your own XAMPP, except that you don't use Apache but Nginx. But I would recommend going to Nginx anyway. It's I don't know, it's easier to understand the configuration and stuff. So now there is features like SSL, like to get HTTPS, but I'm not going to go into that now. But I might make an in-depth version of this, but I will be putting that on either a YouTube channel or make a course out of it, but I don't know that yet. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I will see you not next Monday, but the Monday after. Bye.